David Mundell, welcome to Acting Prime Minister, and thanks for having us here in the office that you're still settling into.
Yes.
I can see the boxes here still yet to be unpacked. I guess this is after your move out of government, is it?
Yeah, I mean, there's two moves, because one, move out of Dover House to Scotland office in Whitehall, and then the move from the ministerial corridor here in the House of Commons. I mean, one of the features of being a cabinet minister is you also get a really good room in the Commons, but within hours, literally hours of me losing my position, the crates were outside and they were expecting us to move. And when I got here, I thought, well, everything is just really very, very uncertain. So I'm not going to preempt anything by unpacking those crates.
Well, I guess because there might be an election, or you might end up back in government, you never know.
Well, there might be an election was my principal reason for not doing it. I mean, if we get to Christmas and we haven't had an election, then I might start the unpacking process.
And this used to be Boris Johnson's office?
Yes, it did. Between the point that he was leaving the Foreign Office and really the start of his leadership campaign, he was based in this office. So there's just a little bit of symmetry there in the sense that when he became Prime Minister, I left the Scotland office, came into this office.
And to put it brutally, for people who might not be familiar, you were sacked from Boris Johnson's cabinet when he took over as Prime Minister back in the summer. What did he say to you at the time? What's it like when you're in government and you get sort of the call to say?
Well, I was expecting it. So because I haven't been his biggest fan in the past, and I think I wasn't a supporter of his during the leadership campaign. So I saw it coming, and during, actually while he was making the speech in Downing Street about his ambitions as Prime Minister, I got the call to say that he wanted to see me within about an hour, and in his office in the House of Commons, and that's not a good call. You know that that call means that you're on the way out. But the meeting I had with him was perfectly amicable. I mean, he basically said to me that he wanted his own person in the job, and as Prime Minister, he's entitled to do that. So there was no animosity in the conversation. One thing I did do was give him a copy of the front page of the Sun newspaper from Scotland, because it was very, very different to the Sun newspaper here in London. It was very negative about him taking over as Prime Minister. It had him as Buzz Lightyear, but with some negative caricature, and I just wanted to get it over to him the message that the political landscape in Scotland is very, very different, and he needs to acknowledge that.
Do you think he took that in?
I think he does. I think he has, and I think he, I think he understands the lay of the land in Scotland, and has to work with that. He's not magically going to become incredibly popular overnight. I think he'll be judged on what he does. I think if he is able to deliver Brexit, that will give him a positive standing, certainly with a large proportion of the electorate in Scotland. So I think he'll be judged on his actions, on his delivery.
Was it a relief in some ways? I mean, you said yourself you didn't support Boris Johnson, certainly not in the leadership contest. Was it a relief in a way not to have to be a member of his government, because now you can just be honest and you can do your own thing on the backbench? Well,
I've been a minister, of course, for 9 years in the Scotland office, so it was an adjustment. But actually, because in a sense we almost immediately went into recess, I have a sort of large constituency tour I do in my constituency round to visit every community. So you're out and about. We came back. The period in September was a very unusual period. So it hasn't actually, in a sense, just until really now, am I seeing the change in routine?
Yeah,
if you know what I mean. Because we've had such a disjointed period, and actually for the last 2 or 3 months I think, how did I ever fit in being a minister when I've got so many other things to do? It's sort of like what people say when they retire. How did I ever work?
Busier than ever.
So I think, but I think it's the smaller things that I feel, if there is a sense of relief, because of the big ticket items, independence, Brexit, you expect to be held to account, speaking about those things every day basically. But it's just those left field things that happen, government cock up in Scotland, and you're responsible and something, and it's that bit that actually that in a sense is the bigger, it's the relief. It's always these unexpected things, that really had nothing to do with my responsibilities really, and you had to you had to sort them out, and that could happen at any time, sort of day or night. So because obviously you're still commenting on Brexit and on independence, but these sort of left side issues, so you don't have that concern that something's just going to flare up completely unexpected.
And just lastly on this topic of you leaving government, there was a lot of fanfare when Boris Johnson made his reshuffle about diversity. Downing Street was saying this is the most diverse cabinet in history because there were more women and more ethnic minorities. But there are now no LGBT members since you left. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's disappointing. I think it doesn't actually tick the box then of being diverse. I felt, in terms of LGBT issues, the cabinet was at its strongest when both Justine and I were in. Justine Greening and I were in the cabinet, because she was a very strong advocate, and that time she part of the time she said I had the women inequalities brief, and really I think sought to drive that forward. So I always felt that because we did have a discussion in cabinet, for example, when the results of the survey
LGBT survey
were launched, and I felt able to contribute to that, both from my own experience and in fact as well on the trans issues, because I'm a great believer in trans equality. I'm not pretending that it's not a complicated or indeed now controversial issue, but I think that we were able to bring a perspective to those sort of discussions. I mean, I don't think it's in any way a deliberate, it's a deliberate thing to exclude, but it just, it hasn't happened, and therefore I think you can't really say that the cabinet's as diverse as you would want it to be.
It's an oversight, isn't it?
It's an oversight. I mean, some people would say, oh well, did you have to specifically appoint someone? But I would have hoped that we have a very good we have a very good collection of LGBT MPs within the Conservative Party. A lot of ministers doing a good job, but it was nice to see somebody in the cabinet.
Yeah, because it is the most LGBT parliament in the world, apparently, and yet we don't have anyone in government at this cabinet level anyway. So,
but we have a lot of other people, and we do have strong champions. So that is positive.
Okay, well look, forget about being Scottish Secretary now, because you're Prime Minister instead. Much bigger job. You walk through that Downing Street door, and let's just have some fun and set the scene for a minute now. What do you think the picture is that you'd hang on the wall behind the desk to settle in and make yourself? I can see some pictures wrapped up in bubble wrap down there.
They're mainly photographs. I do like dramatic photography, so I think that some dramatic Scottish scene, I think, on a large canvas particularly from the west, the mountains, the sea, the combination of that. It's something like that. I think to give it a very a very distinct Scottish, perhaps Scottish feel, but not a modern feel. So I wouldn't be putting the monarch of the Glen up.
Okay.
In terms of that.
A dramatic scene. Yeah. So it could be a dramatic premiership, maybe. It might be
stormy,
dark,
storm. No. There'd be light. There'd be light coming through. One of those where how you can sometimes get where the funnel of light comes through the clouds.
Okay. You be the light. piercing through that stormy sea.
I keep me.
I'm already writing your first speech as
Yeah, it is. It's excellent.
And what do you think the drink is that you'd pour yourself? I think I might know the answer to this.
Yeah, I think it would be a large Scotch.
Yeah, I thought you might say
It
that.
would be a large Scotch. My favourite malt is Highland Park, which is actually from Orkney at the very other end of Scotland. But now I do have a very prestigious distillery in my own constituency, the Annandale Distillery. So I might go for their Man of Words, which is the bottle of whiskey I gave Theresa May as a departing gift.
And is it true that you had a whiskey bar installed?
We don't use the word bar
in the Scotland office.
No, we had an export showcase.
Right, but it was there permanently.
It can be moved.
Open between.
It can be moved.
5 p.m. and
It can
12.
be moved. It was an opportunity, and is for me and now my successor to promote whiskey. Whiskey is the most important export from Scotland, from the United Kingdom. We do a lot of promoting it overseas. We need to promote it in our own office. But I had one rule: it was never allowed to be called a bar. It was an export showcase.
It's probably why we didn't find it in any of the government papers, otherwise it could have been quite a good story. Let's talk about your path to becoming Prime Minister as well now, because your first job in politics was as a councillor, wasn't
That's
it?
right, yeah.
For the SDP.
Yes, a long time ago.
And now switching parties is quite fashionable these days. Have you been tempted?
No, not at all.
You're happy still?
Not at all. No. Well, I mean, I was, I think the SDP played an important role in politics at that time, in sort of rebalancing the landscape. And it was very exciting. I mean, I was 21. It was very exciting, to be part of something new, and different, and trying to change the political landscape. But it really, it ran its course, and I had been Conservative before the SDP came along, and it just was clear to me that was really my natural home. And I'm now much more of a view, if you don't like something, you have to fight your corner, because over time, as experience shows, parties move backwards and forwards, and you have to try and shape it. And when I was first involved with Scottish Conservatives, I mean, we were really completely out of the loop. We had no MPs. Our prospects for Scottish Parliament elections didn't look that great, because we had opposed the Scottish Parliament. But we worked very hard to re-establish ourselves, first through David McLeish and Annabel Goldie. Then Ruth had a transformational effect when she came into office post 2011.
And you were the only Conservative MP for a long time.
For 12 years. It has a great benefit, which I suspect wouldn't be the case if I was Prime Minister, is that I always agreed with myself.
There was the
Scottish Conservative group at Westminster was always unanimous in its position. So you can imagine that actually it was quite an adjustment for me to find that I had 12 colleagues, and they might have views and opinions which weren't necessarily the same as mine.
I was going to ask you what you preferred, because being on your own is tough, because then you have to take all the responsibility of speaking on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives. But then equally, as you say, if you've got 13 MPs in a grouping, some might say unlucky number, and it could get a little bit argumentative, I guess.
Well, it was a lucky number for Theresa May, and
true.
Because without my 12 colleagues, Jeremy Corbyn would have been Prime Minister. I mean,
as I think you regularly reminded
that was the reality. Of course, I welcomed having colleagues, because there's firstly the practical bit, like early morning radio and late night television. And there was somebody else to do that, because for 12 years I was the only person who ticked the box Scottish Conservative and MP.
Yeah, and you were Scottish Secretary.
And your colleagues in the BBC used to have a Scotland opt-out in Newsnight, which started at 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
And you used to have to go along to that sort of 11 o'clock opt-out. If you finished in Parliament, just wait round for that. Having been on radio at 6:30 you know, I mean, that was really tough.
Yeah.
I found out though, once we got into the world of Twitter, that nobody watched that programme because only 6 people tweeted to say that I was a liar when I was last on it. And whereas the ITV equivalent or STV equivalent, you got hundreds of people.
Right, okay.
That, so
well, I better not say anything, it might sound churlish.
At least I felt I was being watched.
No wonder it's always so easy to get you to come on board a TV. One last thing on this as well in terms of your path to becoming Prime Minister, and we've already touched on it, but you were the first openly gay Conservative in Cabinet.
Yeah.
And I certainly remember getting the call from you the day that you decided you were going to come out. It was a big day for you, and I think a big day for politics, and actually for LGBT people as well, to have someone of that level in the Cabinet. When you look back on your time in politics, in the closet, to use a naff term, how do you feel about it now? Because it must have been kind of, I know we've talked about it before, it must have been pressure, it must have been kind of tough being in politics and having a secret.
Well, I've said to you before, which is, you know, what many people feel when they come out is, why didn't I do that before?
Yeah.
And you know, it's easy. It's easy to think that. I mean, it wasn't, you know, it wasn't my political career that in any way I think impeded me coming out. I'm pretty clear, you know, on that. It was more. It was more just myself, you know, just being the right time for me. And as I've said before, I did it for myself. I didn't do it to be some spokesman or some role model or anything. I did it for me because I felt I personally would be happier, have a better life if I did, which I have, and I'm very clear on that. And it politically, I mean, what, you know, the thing I found is it doesn't have any negative impact, but I don't find that in my constituency. Some people might thought, well, it represents sort of small town Scotland, that'll be an issue. And I've really only on the doorstep encountered one person, you know, out of 68,000 voters who ever brought it up in a negative way. But on the other hand, I'm quite clear I live in a very privileged world, you know, a very it's a world in which it isn't going to be an issue, and there's lots of support and other people and all the rest of it, and that's why, and which I know you've been involved in, you know, whereas the kids in schools, people in other communities who are having a really tough time, and you know, just because it's been relatively straightforward for me, we can't be complacent about that.
Yeah. Just lastly on this point, do you feel like a different person now? Because I think you seem a bit different. I think you seem a bit happier.
I am happier. I'm absolutely, and I'm absolutely happier, which is why I did it. I mean, I've sensed in myself that I would be, that you know, and that you know, there would be more. It'd be more relaxed. As you say, you wouldn't have to think about what what you say or what. And the other side of it, of course, is if you're engaged with other people, you know, you can't ask. It's very hard to ask other people to keep a secret.
Yeah. Or,
you know, then to have to. Or then to have to hide things about yourself from other people because you don't want, you know, the full, you know, the full story of your life to come out. These are real pressures. You know,
it becomes complex.
It becomes very, very complex, and if you wouldn't necessarily see it as lying, but if you're economical with the truth, you often do get caught out in that way, and I think, you know, so all of that pressure, you know, lifted, but it was exhausting. I think I said to you at the time, you know, the day after I was absolutely physically exhausted, because it was very, very draining. But I'm very grateful on that, you know, to David Cameron, because he was very supportive, you know, of me doing it.
Yeah, because this was 2016, wasn't it?
And how I wanted to do it as well. And you know, he was, and I'm glad that it is, you know, recognised, you know, beyond the Brexit fog. I mean, David was a great champion of the LGBT cause, and I think that should always be recognised.
Okay, let's get back to being Prime Minister now. You've got to appoint the Cabinet.
Yes.
Can we get a bit bitchy for a minute? Who would you sack?
Oh well, I think we've got a cabinet for this moment in time, and I think many of the people who are in the cabinet would see themselves there on that basis.
Is there someone that really surprised you when they went into Boris Johnson's cabinet?
Well, I think there are people who, I think there are people who, given views that they'd previously expressed, you might have been surprised that they were in the cabinet. On the other hand, you have to take a view that to have a sort of ecumenical and widespread of views is a good thing, and therefore I don't have any personal animus towards anybody who's in the cabinet. We had some throughout my period in the cabinet, we've had some interesting people in the cabinet, and some have lasted longer than others. I mean, up until I was fired, I had been the person in their job for the longest.
Yeah.
At just over 4.5 years. Whereas some of the other departments, people have been. It's like a revolving door.
Not least the Brexit department. Okay, so you're being very discreet. Who would you bring back then, to put it in a nicer way? Who would you love to put in your cabinet who maybe has really impressed you in?
Well, I mean, as I was referring to before, I mean, I am very disappointed. I'm a good friend of Justine Greenings, and I'm really disappointed that she's leaving Parliament. That she has become, a bit more detached from the, obviously the Conservative parliamentary party. I really respect her views on Brexit, and she places a lot of weight on her views of her constituent.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think Justine, for example, is a big loss to Parliament. I got on because she was also doing the women equalities role. I got on very well with Penny Mordaunt.
Oh yeah.
I thought she had done a really good job.
It was surprising when she was sacked, actually.
As a Defence Secretary, because that fitted well with her background. And again, I thought it was a really good signal when the Defence Secretary was doing women equalities as well. So I mean, they are two colleagues who I've really over the time and enjoyed working with.
Okay, and then let's talk about some of the issues that will be on your desk. I mean, Brexit obviously is going to be the biggest issue for any Prime Minister. How would you go about Brexit at this junction that we're at now?
Well, of course, I wouldn't start from here, which is... But on the other hand, many of, you have to, I do take responsibility, we don't shuffle it. Some of the things that we did were not right, were not the right things to do, and but we're where we are, and we need to resolve it. I mean, if you're out on the street, if you're speaking on the doors, as I've have been regularly over the recent weeks, people just want this sorted, and so they're not, and they're not in the sort of minutiae that some parliamentary colleagues are. They want it sorted. It's gone on too long. People don't understand that they voted 3.5 years ago to leave the EU. We haven't left the EU.
Yeah.
They don't really, the issues which then come forward, to be discussed are just not issues that resonate with the public. My constituency, a backstop is something you keep the door open with. It is not. It is not something that people are fixated with in the way that some parliamentary colleagues are. So, I mean, I think the overwhelming priority is to get it sorted, and hopefully, there are signs that in some way it will be possible to achieve a resolution. I think the other mistake, which I think was made, I made it. I'm happy to acknowledge that, is that of just setting out too many precursors, red lines, whatever, and not in a situation like that. You've got to judge each situation as you find it, and not paint. We painted ourselves into so many corners when actually we needed a bit of flexibility and compromise. And I think hopefully, that's what I would, if I was Prime Minister, be bringing to the role: the determination to do it, but the ability to
be
flexible, show some compromise, but not, on the other hand, undermine the project.
I mean, this is all going to be horrendously out of date probably by the time we broadcast this podcast, but we'll talk about it anyway. The Prime Minister is still in these negotiations, and the sticking point, as you mentioned, is the backstop and what replaces the backstop. And you've been really clear before that if there were any kind of special circumstances for Northern Ireland, you wouldn't be able to stomach those because it would potentially challenge the integrity of the Union. Is that still your view? Because it looks as though he might be coming up with some special dispensation for Northern Ireland.
Well, I think we have to see what it is, and it just goes back to what I've said before. I think making set positions ahead of knowing what is actually on the table, because over the last few days, all sorts of we started off a week ago. It was all off. The Prime Minister falling out with Angela Merkel. The next day there was a love-in with Leo Varadkar.
Yeah.
And now we're working intensely. I want to see, what's on the table, how that's responded to in Northern Ireland. What I also don't want to do though is, to politicise Northern Ireland in a nationalist way, which unfortunately I feel that Nicola Sturgeon has done, in the sense of just saying, Northern Ireland is getting special treatment, when in fact Northern Ireland is different. There are a lot of differences there just now.
Well, it's got a border with the EU for a start.
But there's a lot of differences now in the way that things operate in Northern Ireland than compared to operate in the rest of the GB. So we need to see what it is that's on the table. So I don't want to be one of the people who's just sort of setting red lines about it, because we know where that leads to. Let's see what's on the table. I'm not someone who is going to sign up to sign up to anything that undermines the integrity of the United Kingdom. But we've got to a point where not delivering Brexit, in my view, would threaten the integrity of the United Kingdom because of the political turbulence that would cause.
I mean, this leads us into talking about Scottish independence as well, which is probably going to be an issue that comes across your desk as Prime Minister, especially when Nicola Sturgeon said this week that she wants a referendum next year.
Yes.
This is an obvious question with an obvious answer, I think, but what would you say if she came to you and said, right, we want that referendum next year?
No. Yeah. I think it'd be quite simple. We've had a referendum. We had a referendum in 2014. People voted decisively to remain in the United Kingdom. Nicola Sturgeon and all her acolytes said that was a once-in-a-generation event.
The difficulty is, what if she does really well though in what we think is the upcoming election? The SNP get the largest number of seats. Maybe they take some of those Labour seats back, probably some of the Tory seats back. If she's gone into that election with a manifesto pledging a second referendum, it's going to be really hard to resist, isn't it?
I don't.
Government?
Well, I think that we're very clear that we've had a referendum, and the agreement that was signed by Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond at that time was that the result of that referendum would be respected. And yet from the day after, they have just repeatedly continued to campaign for another independence referendum and independence. And all the time that they've changed their criteria for having that. And I mean, at least now, in the last few days, they've been very frank that Brexit has nothing to do with this. They would still be demanding an independence referendum even if we weren't having Brexit. Because previously they said, we're having it because Brexit has changed everything. But it hasn't for them, because they're entirely driven by having another independence referendum, because that takes precedence over every other issue. And what my constituents find, although they're devolved issues like health, education, housing, they don't get a look in. And it's all this focus on independence. And yes, there are people who support independence, but the majority of people in Scotland voted to remain in the UK, and therefore I don't in the foreseeable future see the case for having another independence referendum.
There was a poll out just before the SNP conference saying that 50% of people now support independence. And look, these polls move around all the time. Let's not read too much into it. But the reason I raise it is to ask whether you think maybe there's a bit of complacency at the heart of government at the moment about the threat of a second referendum.
I don't think there's a complacency. I do think, events have fed into an SNP narrative. You can't. The SNP narrative is Westminster doesn't work for Scotland. Over the last year, Westminster has put itself, in my view, in the worst possible light. And that's not just a view that's felt in Scotland. It's felt in other parts of the United Kingdom. Yet in Scotland, there is a message. Well, if you don't like it, here's an alternative. I think we have, by the way in which Westminster has conducted itself, we have played into that narrative of Westminster doesn't work for Scotland. But that isn't actually the broad sweep of issues that would need to be debated in relation to having independence or having another independence referendum. And of course, front and centre would always be the economy, the proposals, which I think would become under great scrutiny for a separate Scottish currency.
Yeah, which of course came up last time.
I have no idea how that would work. So I think we've got a degree of, as we would say in Scotland, people are scunnered with Westminster Parliament and the way in which it's conducted itself in recent times. But and that has played into sort of national narrative. But I am confident that if we had the same full debate as we had 5 years ago, that the issues are pretty much the same. It's the economic, it's Scotland's economic prospects, and of course the other issue which hasn't been adequately resolved and is caught up in some of this independence discussion, is Scotland's place in the EU. The SNP appear to suggest Scotland automatically would be in the EU, but it's quite clear that Scotland wouldn't automatically be in the EU, and there are a lot of diverse views come from Europe as to how and if Scotland would get into the EU.
And Nicola Sturgeon enjoys sort of playing on the national politics. Do you think Boris Johnson makes Scottish independence more likely?
I don't subscribe to that view. I think Boris isn't going to win the argument in Scotland for Scotland in the United Kingdom, because Scots in Scotland are going to determine this issue. And if we have another referendum, pretty much like the previous one, it will be people in Scotland deciding for ourselves, if we put it that way, what's the outcome? It's so David Cameron did have a role, but if you actually reflect back into 24, it was a relatively limited.
Yeah, he came up sort of last minute.
It's a relatively limited role which he and indeed Ed Miliband had. Ruth was very much the Conservative face in that. Alistair Darling.
I mean, I was going to ask you about Ruth, because do you think perhaps then the bigger impact will be losing Ruth Davidson, because she won't be there on the stage making that case, and she's made it quite convincingly?
Well, she hasn't ruled out playing a part in if there was ever another independence referendum. So
right.
I mean, and obviously from our previous discussion, I foresee that would be, years away. But if it was ever to happen at all, so and who knows what Ruth would be doing and what role she might play. I mean, I think we do have to, those people who support the United Kingdom, we have to continue always to make the case. I don't agree with the nationalist cause, but I am always very conscious that every day they make the case for independence. Something comes up and Scotland's independent, it would be better. They make the case for it, and we don't make the case for the United Kingdom, all the time.
Okay. Well, look, your time's almost up as Prime Minister, so we've got to get some fun questions in to finish off. So let's do a bit of a speed round. Which former Prime Minister would you invite round for dinner first, do you think? Theresa May or Boris Johnson?
They have to be living.
Well, actually, it's a good question. In this fantasy world, you can have whoever you want. I mean, I was going to give you the choice of either Boris Johnson or Theresa May. Who do you think you prefer out of those two? It's deliberately tricky.
I think I think it's always best to have your immediate successor around, isn't it?
Right. Okay.
Predecessor.
Fine. So,
Immediate predecessor.
So it's got to be Boris Johnson. In other words, do you think the small talk would be easier with?
I've always got on very well with Theresa May,
okay, all right.
and have been able to. I've never struggled to have a conversation with her. I find her very personable.
Okay, fair enough. Which world leader would you love to meet? It can be anyone. You don't have to just sort of say Donald Trump because that's.
I've met Donald Trump.
Have you?
Yes, I welcomed him to Scotland. He's very orange. That was my piece of feedback.
That's your abiding memory of it.
Well, I had to meet him at Prestwick Airport to give him the formal greeting when he came to Scotland.
Yeah.
And he, so I was at the bottom of the stairway, and it wasn't clear. I was a bit concerned that he might just walk right past me, because there was a motorcade. I was the only person at the bottom of the stairs. Obviously I didn't know how the conversation would go, but in fact he did. He came down, and the first thing he did was put his arm on my shoulder, so I realised we were going to have some degree of engagement.
Right, okay.
So he loved Scotland, he loved his mother, and he loved golf. Those were the sort of three headline topics from the chat.
Okay.
So I felt we'd maybe exhausted our. So I might not invite him around, because we had a very full conversation.
Right.
The funny thing from that event, though, was the thing that went viral on social media was whether Melania was a body double.
Oh, I saw all of that.
And I'm afraid she only said hello and thank you to me, so I couldn't really.
You couldn't discern.
I couldn't discern. Discern.
I think I might know the answer to this one as well. I should start asking you questions I know the answer to. What would your song be at party conference? It's going to be something by the Eagles, isn't it?
Yes.
So you love the Eagles.
Yes, I love the Eagles. Take It Easy is always a great song. Although
does it send the right message though, as Prime Minister?
Well, you may lose and you may win, but we'll never be here again.
Okay,
so take it easy.
Okay.
Desperado might be a more appropriate.
Apart from me, who's your gay icon?
I
am just joking about me, but listeners are absolutely clear about this.
Goodness, that's a tough.
Have you seen the Judy Garland film?
Yeah. Well, Judy, I'm a great fan of Judy Garland, and
you should see the film. It's really good.
I mean, the phrase, and which is always actually I felt also perhaps applying to David Cameron. But people said about Judy Garland was that she was able to always draw defeat out of the jaws of victory, and but she's such a vulnerable. I think she's a great character, and I thought it was a fitting tribute to her that there was a analysis to show that The Wizard of Oz was the most influential film ever. They did some computer metric. It was reported in the news, even I think on ITV, so it is true. So,
and lastly, I ask everyone this, but would you ever want to be Prime Minister? Do you think, in a fantasy world, would you? Is it something that you
not as it is now? Yeah, I think the 24/7 Prime Minister. The constant intrusion. So I'd like to be Prime Minister as Harold Macmillan was Prime Minister.
9 till 5.
9 to 5, and just no intrusion into your personal. I think now the intensity, and I don't know whether I'd be able to commit to that level of intensity of giving up your whole life, every aspect of your life. I mean, as we see with the current Prime Minister, your family.
Everything's up for grabs.
Everything's up for grabs. Everything you've ever done, said, all up for grabs.
Yeah. Okay, a very level-headed way to end the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on, David Mandel. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Paul.